Hello, I'm Mrs. Evelyn. Welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoyed today's story. I spent 7 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. 7 years away from my 3 kids. 7 years locked in a cell while the real thief walked free in the same house where I used to clean the floors. And the worst part? The person who put me there knew the truth all along. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the day everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because my youngest, Sophia, had just turned 4 the day before, and I was still thinking about her little face covered in birthday cake. I got to Mrs. Henderson's mansion at 6 a.m., like always. The house was huge. 8 bedrooms, marble floors, chandeliers in every room. The kind of place that made you feel small just walking through the door. Mrs. Henderson was a wealthy widow. Her husband had died 2 years before I started working there, leaving her with more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. She had 1 son, Tyler. He was 20 years old, didn't work, didn't go to school. Just lived off his mother's money and spent his days doing God knows what. I'd only been working there for 6 months. The pay was decent, not great, but enough to help my husband Marco cover rent and keep food on the table for our 3 kids. We lived in a small apartment in the poor side of town. 2 bedrooms for 5 people. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked in winter, but it was home, and we were making it work. Barely. That morning I was cleaning the upstairs hallway when I heard Mrs. Henderson scream. Not a normal scream. A scream that made your blood freeze. The kind of sound that meant something terrible had happened. I dropped my mop and ran toward her bedroom. She was standing in front of her open jewelry box, her hands shaking. The box was empty. "Where are they?" she said, her voice cold and sharp. "Where are my jewels?" My heart started pounding. I don't know, Mrs. Henderson. What's missing?" "Everything." She turned to look at me, and the way she stared made me feel like I was already guilty. My gold necklaces, my diamond earrings, the emerald bracelet my husband gave me, all of it, gone. I felt sick. "I didn't touch anything, I swear. I only cleaned—" "You're the only one who comes into this room." She cut me off. Her face was red now, angry. "You're the only one besides me who has access to this floor." "But I would never—" "Call the police," she said. Not to me. She was talking to someone behind me. I turned and saw Tyler standing in the doorway, his phone already in his hand. He looked at me with this blank expression. No surprise, no concern, nothing. Just blank. The police came within 20 minutes. 2 officers. They asked me questions. Did I take the jewelry? Where was I yesterday? Did I need money? Was I struggling financially? Of course I was struggling financially. Everyone in my neighborhood was struggling. That didn't make me a thief. But Mrs. Henderson kept pushing. She told them I was the only person with access. She told them the jewelry was worth over $200,000. She told them I had motive. I was poor. I needed money. I had 3 kids to feed. She made it sound so simple, so obvious. They searched me right there, patted me down in front of everyone, went through my bag, found nothing. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't satisfied. "Search her house," she demanded. She obviously didn't bring them here. She must have hidden them at home. I tried to explain that I hadn't taken anything, that I would never risk my job, my family, my freedom for jewelry I could never even sell without getting caught. But no one was listening. They took me to the station, put me in a small gray room with a table and 2 chairs, made me wait for 3 hours before anyone came to talk to me. When they finally did, they told me they'd searched my apartment, turned the whole place upside down, terrified my kids, made Marco feel helpless because he couldn't stop them, and they found nothing because there was nothing to find. But here's the thing about being poor and accused of stealing from the rich. It doesn't matter if they find evidence or not, Mrs. Henderson had money. She had lawyers. She had connections. And she wanted someone to pay for her loss. I couldn't afford a good lawyer. The public defender they gave me was a tired-looking man in his 50s who barely looked at my case. He told me to take a plea deal. Said if I admitted to taking the jewelry and told them where it was, I'd get a lighter sentence. But I didn't take the jewelry, and I didn't know where it was, so I refused. Big mistake. The trial was a joke. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row every single day, crying about her stolen family heirlooms. Her lawyer painted me as a desperate criminal who saw an opportunity and took it. They brought up my financial situation, my lack of savings, the fact that Marco had been out of work for 2 months before I got the job at the Henderson house. They made it sound like I was some kind of mastermind, like I'd planned this whole thing from the beginning. My lawyer barely put up a fight. He called Marco to testify, and my husband tried his best to defend me. Told them I would never do something like this, that I was a good mother, a good wife, a hard worker. But the jury didn't care about that. They saw a rich white woman crying about her stolen jewelry and a poor Latina housekeeper who couldn't prove her innocence. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty. The judge gave me 7 years. 7 years for a crime I didn't commit. 7 years away from my babies. 7 years in a cell while the person who actually took those jewels, whoever they were, got to walk free. When they put the handcuffs on me, I looked at Marco in the gallery. He was holding Sophia. Our 2 boys, Miguel and Carlos, were on either side of him, crying. Miguel was only 9. Carlos was 7. Sophia was 4 years old, and her mother was going to prison. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the judge he was wrong, that they were all wrong, that I was innocent, but my voice wouldn't work. All I could do was mouth the words, "I'm sorry," to my family, as they led me away. Prison was exactly as bad as you think it is, maybe worse. The first night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my kids, about Marco trying to take care of them alone, about Sophia asking where Mommy was, about Miguel and Carlos trying to be strong, but not understanding why this was happening. And I kept thinking about Mrs. Henderson's face when she accused me, that cold, certain look, like she knew I was guilty, like there was no doubt in her mind. But there was something else I couldn't stop thinking about, something that nagged at me every single day I was locked up in that cell. Tyler's face, that blank expression when he saw me standing in his mother's bedroom. The way he'd called the police so quickly. The way he'd testified at the trial, saying he'd noticed I'd been acting strange the week before the jewelry disappeared. He'd lied. I knew he'd lied. I'd barely ever spoken to Tyler in those 6 months. He usually ignored me completely, like I was invisible. So why would he suddenly notice I was acting strange? But I had no proof, no way to fight back, no way to make anyone believe me. So I sat in that cell, day after day, month after month, year after year, missing my kids' birthdays, missing their school plays, missing their first days of school, missing everything. And the whole time, I knew the truth was still out there, somewhere. I just had no idea it was about to come crashing down in the most unexpected way possible. The first year was the hardest, not just because of the adjustment to prison life, the noise, the fights, the constant fear, but because of the visits. Marco brought the kids every month, every single month for that first year. He'd drive 3 hours to the prison, wait in line for 2 hours, just so our kids could see me for 30 minutes through a glass window, and every single time, it broke something inside me. Sophia didn't understand. She'd press her little hands against the glass and ask when I was coming home. "Soon, baby," I'd tell her. "Mommy will be home soon." But soon turned into months, and months turned into years. Miguel got quiet. He used to be this loud, happy kid who couldn't stop talking. But after the first few visits, he barely said anything. Just sat there looking at me with these sad eyes that made me want to punch through the glass. Carlos got angry, started getting in trouble at school, fighting with other kids. Marco told me the teachers said he was acting out because of what happened to me. But what could I do? I couldn't be there. I couldn't help him. I couldn't do anything. By the second year, the visits got less frequent. Not because Marco didn't want to come. He did. But money was tight. Gas was expensive. He was working 2 jobs just to keep the apartment and feed 3 kids. Sometimes he had to choose between visiting me and paying the electric bill. I told him to choose the bills. I told him the kids needed food and heat more than they needed to see me cry through prison glass. But God, it hurt. Every missed visit felt like losing them all over again. I made friends in prison. Not the kind of friends you choose, but the kind you need to survive. There was Linda, a woman in her 40s who'd been locked up for drug possession. She was kind, kept me from falling apart completely those first few months. And there was Rosa, who'd killed her abusive husband in self-defense. She got 15 years. The husband had put her in the hospital 4 times. But the jury didn't care about that. They just saw a dead man and a woman holding a knife. We all had stories. We all swore we'd been wronged in some way. But after a while, you start to wonder, does it even matter? Does anyone on the outside care whether we're guilty or innocent? Or are we just bodies filling cells, making the system run? I tried to keep hope alive. I filed appeals. Marco scraped together enough money to hire a better lawyer. Still not a great one, but better than the public defender. The lawyer looked at my case, shook his head and said, "Without new evidence, there's nothing I can do. The conviction stands." New evidence. That's what I needed. But how was I supposed to find new evidence from inside a prison cell? I wrote letters to Mrs. Henderson, begged her to reconsider, told her I had 3 kids who needed their mother, asked her to please look again. Maybe someone else had access to her room. Maybe she'd misplaced the jewelry. Maybe there was another explanation. She never wrote back, not once. I wrote to Tyler too. 1 letter, just 1. I asked him directly, did he know anything about the jewelry? Had he seen anyone suspicious around the house? Did he remember anything that might help me? He never responded either. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. He knew something. I was sure of it now. But knowing and proving are 2 very different things. Year 3 came and went. Then year 4. I stopped counting the days. It hurt too much. I just focused on surviving. Getting through each day. Eating, sleeping. Working in the prison laundry room. Trying not to think about everything I was missing. Sophia turned 11. Miguel turned 16. Carlos turned 14. My babies were growing up without me. Marco sent photos sometimes. School pictures. Birthday pictures. I kept them under my pillow. Looked at them every night before I went to sleep. Tried to memorize their faces because they kept changing, kept getting older, and I wasn't there to see it happen in real time. In year 5, something shifted. Marco's letters started coming less often. When he did write, they were shorter, more distant. He was tired. I could feel it through the words on the page. He was tired of waiting, tired of being alone, tired of raising 3 kids by himself while his wife sat in prison for a crime she didn't commit. I couldn't blame him. I couldn't even be angry. What kind of life was this for him? For any of them. But I also couldn't let go. Couldn't tell him to move on. Couldn't give him permission to forget about me. Because if I did that, if I accepted that this was my life now, that I'd never get out, never prove my innocence, never see my family again, then I'd have nothing left to fight for. So I held on, even when it hurt, even when it seemed hopeless. Year 6 was when things started to get strange. I got a letter, not from Marco, not from the kids, from someone I'd never heard of, a lawyer named David Chen. He said he'd heard about my case, said something about it didn't sit right with him, asked if he could look into it. Pro bono, free. I didn't believe it at first. Why would some random lawyer care about my case 6 years later? What was in it for him? But I wrote back anyway, because what did I have to lose? He came to visit me 2 weeks later. Young guy, maybe early 30s, wore a nice suit, but had this nervous energy, like he cared too much about everything. He sat across from me in the visiting room and opened a file folder full of papers. "I've been reviewing your case," he said, "and I think you got screwed." I almost laughed. "Yeah, I know." "No, I mean really screwed," he continued. "Your original lawyer barely put up a defense. The prosecution's case was weak. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses, nothing except Mrs. Henderson's accusation and your financial situation. That shouldn't have been enough for a conviction." "But it was," I said flatly. "It was. But that doesn't mean it was right." He leaned forward. "I want to file a new appeal, a real one. I've been digging into Mrs. Henderson's background, her son's background, and I'm finding some interesting things." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of things?" "Tyler Henderson has a gambling problem," David said. "A bad one. He's been in debt to some dangerous people for years. And right around the time the jewelry went missing, he paid off a huge debt, $50,000, all at once." I felt cold. "How did he get $50,000? "That's what I'm trying to find out," David said. "But here's the interesting part. His mother gave him that money. She wrote him a check 2 days after the jewelry disappeared, 2 days after she accused you of stealing it." My mind was racing. So she knew. She knew he took it. Maybe. Or maybe she suspected and decided to cover for him. Either way, it's suspicious as hell, and it's something your original lawyer should have investigated. "Why didn't he?" David shrugged. "Because he didn't care. Because you couldn't pay him. Because the system doesn't work for people like you." He closed the folder. "But I care, and I'm going to prove you didn't do this." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But I'd been let down so many times, had my hopes crushed so many times. I didn't know if I could survive another disappointment. "How long will this take?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Months. Maybe longer. Appeals are slow. But I'm not giving up. I promise you that." I nodded, tried to keep the tears from coming. "Thank you." He left, and I went back to my cell, told Rosa and Linda what had happened. They were happy for me, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd seen other inmates get their hopes up, seen them crash and burn when nothing came of it. I tried not to get too excited, tried to stay realistic, but for the first time in 6 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. David came back a month later, then 2 months after that. Each time he had new information, bank records, credit card statements, witness testimonies from people who had seen Tyler at illegal gambling spots, phone records showing calls between Tyler and known loan sharks. He was building a case, a real case, but it was slow, so painfully slow. And every day that passed was another day away from my kids, another day of my life wasted in this place. Year 7 started. I'd been in prison for 6.5 years. Marco had stopped writing completely. The kids' letters came sporadically. Sophia was 12 now. Miguel was 17, almost an adult. Carlos was 15, and according to his last letter, getting ready to drop out of school. I was losing them. Even if I got out tomorrow, I'd already lost so much time, so many moments, so many memories we'd never get back. But David kept working, kept pushing. And then, finally, in the summer of year 7, he came to visit me with a look on his face I'd never seen before. Excitement. Real, genuine excitement. "We got him," he said, sitting down across from me. "We finally got him." My hands started shaking. "What do you mean?" "Tyler Henderson just confessed." I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between us like they were physical things I could reach out and touch. "He confessed?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Tyler confessed?" David nodded, and I could see he was trying to stay professional, trying not to smile too big, but he couldn't help it. "Not directly to us, not yet, but he confessed to someone else, and that person came forward." "Who?" "His girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend now." David pulled out more papers from his folder. "Her name is Jessica Martinez. She and Tyler dated for 3 years. They broke up 2 months ago, and apparently, it didn't end well. She's been carrying this secret the whole time, and she finally decided she couldn't live with it anymore." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "What did she say?" "She said Tyler told her everything about a year into their relationship. He was drunk, feeling guilty, and it all came spilling out." David looked down at his notes. "He told her he stole his mother's jewelry to pay off a gambling debt. Said he owed money to some really dangerous people who were threatening to hurt him if he didn't pay up. So he took the jewelry, sold it to a fence he knew through his gambling connections, got the cash, and paid off the debt." I felt dizzy. After all this time, after 7 years of screaming that I was innocent, of begging people to believe me, here it was, the truth, finally. "And his mother?" I asked. "Did Jessica say anything about Mrs. Henderson?" David's expression darkened. "Yeah, that's the worst part. Tyler told Jessica that his mother figured it out pretty quickly. She confronted him about the jewelry the same day she accused you. He broke down and admitted it. And you know what she did? I knew. Somehow. I already knew. But I needed to hear him say it. She chose to protect him," David said. "She decided it was easier to let you take the fall than to admit her son was a thief and a gambling addict. She gave him the money to cover his tracks, told him to never speak about it again. And she made sure you went to prison for it. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was hot and cold at the same time. It made my vision blur and my hands shake. This woman, this rich, powerful woman, had knowingly destroyed my life to protect her worthless son. She'd taken me away from my children. She'd let me rot in prison for 7 years. And for what? To save her family's reputation? To avoid the embarrassment of having a criminal for a son? "Why did Jessica wait so long?" I managed to ask. "Why didn't she come forward before?" "She was scared," David said. "Tyler threatened her. Told her if she ever said anything, he'd make sure she regretted it And she believed him. She knew the kind of people he was involved with, but after they broke up, after she had some distance, she started thinking about you, about your kids. She said she couldn't sleep at night knowing an innocent woman was in prison because she was too scared to speak up. Better late than never, I guess. But it didn't erase the 7 years. It didn't give me back the time I'd lost with Miguel, Carlos, and Sofia. What happens now? I asked. Now we file for immediate release, David said. With Jessica's testimony, the bank records, the phone records, everything we've gathered. There's no way they can keep you here. The DA's office is already reviewing the case. They know they screwed up. They know they convicted an innocent woman. How long? Could be weeks. Could be months. The system moves slow, even when they know they're wrong. But you're getting out. I promise you that. Weeks. Maybe months. After 7 years, what was a few more weeks? But every day mattered now. Every single day. David left, and I went back to my cell in a daze. Rosa and Linda could tell something had happened. They gathered around me, asking questions, and when I told them, they screamed, actually screamed with joy. Other inmates came over asking what was going on, and before I knew it, half the cell block knew that I was getting out, that I'd been innocent all along. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid to believe in because I might wake up. That night I wrote to Marco, told him everything, told him about David, about Jessica, about Tyler's confession, told him I was coming home. Finally, coming home. I wrote to the kids too, separate letters for each of them, told them how sorry I was, how much I loved them, how I couldn't wait to hold them again. And then I waited. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life, longer than the first week after I was arrested, longer than the trial, longer than any of the 7 years I'd spent in this place, because now I knew I was getting out. Now I could see the finish line, and every day that passed felt like torture. David came to visit twice more, each time with updates. The DA's office was cooperating. They were expediting the review. Jessica had given a full deposition. They were preparing to file charges against Tyler, and potentially against Mrs. Henderson for obstruction of justice. They're going to pay for this, David told me. Both of them. I'm making sure of it. I didn't care about revenge, not really. I just wanted out. I just wanted to go home to my family. On the 23rd day after David's first visit, a guard came to my cell in the middle of the afternoon. "Pack your things," she said. "You're leaving." I stared at her. "What?" "Your release came through. You're free to go. Now." I didn't have much to pack. 7 years in prison, and everything I owned fit in one small box. Some letters, some photos, a few books. That was it. Rosa and Linda hugged me, cried with me, told me to live a good life, to hug my kids extra tight for them. I promised I would. The walk out of that prison felt unreal, like I was moving through water, like none of it was actually happening. They processed my paperwork, gave me back the clothes I'd been wearing the day I was arrested. They didn't fit anymore. 7 years had changed my body, made me thinner, harder. David was waiting for me outside the gates. He drove me to a hotel, said I could stay there for the night, get cleaned up, and he'd help me get home to my family the next day. But I didn't want to wait. I called Marco from the hotel room. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the number. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello. Marco. It's me." Silence. Then, "Maria." "I'm out," I said and started crying. "I'm out. I'm free." He broke down on the other end of the line. Just completely fell apart. I could hear him sobbing, trying to talk, but not able to get the words out. "I'm coming home," I told him. "Tomorrow. I'm coming home. The kids," he managed to say. "They need to see you. They need—" I know, baby. I'm coming home." We talked for an hour. He told me everything I'd missed. Miguel had graduated high school. Barely, but he'd done it. Carlos had gotten into trouble, but he was doing better now. Working at a grocery store, trying to save money. And Sophia. Sweet Sophia. She was 12 now, almost 13. Growing up so fast. She still asked about me all the time. Still believed I was innocent even when other people didn't. When we finally hung up, I sat on the hotel bed and just breathed. Really breathed. For the first time in 7 years. I was free. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The next morning, David picked me up and drove me home. The 3-hour drive felt like 3 minutes and 3 days at the same time. I kept looking out the window, seeing the world like it was brand new. Trees, cars, people walking dogs. Normal things I'd taken for granted before. When we pulled up to the apartment building, my heart stopped. It was smaller than I remembered, more run down. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows was cracked. But it was home. Marco was waiting outside with the kids, all 3 of them. Miguel was so tall now, almost 6 feet. He looked like a man. Carlos stood next to him, trying to look tough, but with tears already streaming down his face. And Sophia, my baby Sophia, stood in front, bouncing on her toes, barely able to contain herself. I got out of the car, and for a moment nobody moved. We just stared at each other across the parking lot. Then Sophia screamed, "Mama!" and ran. She hit me like a freight train, wrapping her arms around my waist and sobbing into my stomach. I dropped to my knees and held her. Held her so tight I was probably hurting her, but I couldn't let go. Carlos came next, then Miguel, then Marco, all of us in a pile on the ground, crying and holding each other and not caring who was watching. I was home, finally home. But even as I held my family, even as I felt the warmth of their bodies and heard their voices and smelled their familiar smells, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Tyler Henderson was still out there. And Mrs. Henderson was still living in her mansion, probably sleeping just fine at night. They'd stolen 7 years of my life. 7 years I could never get back. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The first week home was overwhelming. Everything felt strange and familiar at the same time. The apartment, the sounds of the neighborhood, the feeling of sleeping in a real bed. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, forgetting where I was, thinking I was still in my cell. Sophia barely left my side. She'd follow me from room to room, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she looked away. At night, she'd climb into bed with me and Marco, squeezing herself between us like she used to do when she was little. Miguel was quieter. He'd hug me, tell me he loved me. But I could see the distance in his eyes. 7 years was a long time. He'd been 9 when I left. Now he was 17. Almost an adult. He'd grown up without me. And I could feel the gap between us. All the years I'd missed. All the moments I wasn't there for. Carlos was angry. Not at me exactly, but at everything. He'd gotten into fights at school. Hung out with the wrong crowd. Marco said he'd barely been able to control him the past 2 years. And now, with me home, Carlos didn't know how to act. Part of him wanted his mum back. Part of him resented me for leaving in the first place, even though it wasn't my fault. Marco looked older, tired. He'd carried everything by himself for 7 years, and it had aged him. But he held me every night like he was afraid I was a dream, like I might vanish if he let go. We were all broken in different ways, but we were together, And that had to count for something. David called me 3 days after I got home. "We need to talk about the case against Tyler and Mrs. Henderson." I met him at a small coffee shop downtown. It felt weird being in public, surrounded by normal people doing normal things. Nobody looked at me like I was a criminal. Nobody knew what I'd been through. David ordered us both coffee and spread out papers on the table between us. "The DA is filing charges against Tyler Henderson for theft and fraud. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years for stealing jewelry. I'd gotten 7 years for a crime I didn't commit, and he might get less time for the crime he actually did. What about his mother?" I asked. David's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. We know she knew. We know she covered for him. Jessica's testimony confirms it. But proving obstruction of justice is harder than you'd think. Mrs. Henderson claims she didn't know for sure, that she only suspected, and she gave Tyler the money because she's his mother, and she wanted to help him out of a bad situation. That's bullshit. I know. But her lawyers are good. Really good. They're arguing that she never made any false statements to the police, never actively lied. She just didn't volunteer information. And technically, that's not a crime." I felt that rage building again. "So she gets away with it?" "Not entirely," David said. "We're filing a civil lawsuit. Wrongful conviction, malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're going after both of them, Tyler and Mrs. Henderson, and we're asking for significant damages. We're talking millions." Millions. The word felt foreign in my mouth. I'd never had money, never expected to have money. But this wasn't about getting rich. This was about making them pay, making them hurt the way they'd hurt me. "How long will it take?" "Civil cases move faster than criminal appeals. Maybe a year, maybe 2. But with the evidence we have, with Jessica's testimony, with the DA's criminal case against Tyler, we're going to win. I'm sure of it." I nodded, tried to let myself believe it. The media got hold of the story 2 weeks later. Local news at first, then bigger outlets. "Woman wrongfully imprisoned for 7 years, while real thief walked free. Millionaire's son, framed housekeeper for his crime. Mother's betrayal. How a wealthy widow let an innocent woman rot in prison." My face was everywhere. The kids' faces were everywhere. Reporters showed up at our apartment, asking for interviews, wanting to hear my story, wanting the exclusive. David handled most of it. He became my spokesperson, carefully controlling what information got out and when. But he did convince me to do one interview, a big one, with a national news program. He said it would help the lawsuit, help make sure people knew the truth. So I sat in front of cameras and told my story, all of it. The arrest, the trial, the 7 years in prison, missing my kids growing up, the confession, coming home to a family that barely knew me anymore. And I talked about Mrs. Henderson, about how she'd looked me in the eye and accused me, about how she'd sat in that courtroom every day, crying about her stolen jewelry, knowing her son was the one who took it, about how she'd chosen to protect him at the cost of my freedom. The interview aired on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, it had millions of views online. People were outraged. Social media exploded with anger at the Hendersons, calls for justice, demands for Mrs. Henderson to be prosecuted. Her lawyers released a statement saying she was devastated by what had happened, that she'd been misled by her son, that she never intended for an innocent person to go to prison. More lies. Tyler's trial happened 6 months after I got out. I sat in the courtroom every single day, just like Mrs. Henderson had sat in mine. But unlike her, I wasn't crying fake tears. I just watched, waited. Jessica testified, told the whole story. Tyler's lawyers tried to discredit her, called her a jilted ex-girlfriend looking for revenge. But the evidence backed her up. The bank records, the phone records, the fence who'd bought the jewelry. They'd found him too, and he confirmed Tyler had sold him Mrs. Henderson's pieces. The jury came back in 6 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge gave him 8 years. 8 years for stealing from his own mother and framing an innocent woman. 1 more year than I'd served for doing nothing. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row during the sentencing, crying. Real tears this time, I think. Her son was going to prison, and she couldn't protect him anymore. Couldn't buy his way out. Couldn't sacrifice someone else to save him. When the bailiffs led Tyler away in handcuffs, he looked at her, and she looked away. The civil lawsuit took another year. David was right. We won. The jury awarded me $4 million in damages. $2 million from Tyler's trust fund. $2 million from Mrs. Henderson's estate. $4 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. More money than I knew what to do with. But it didn't give me back those 7 years. Didn't undo the damage to my family. Didn't erase the nightmares I still had about prison. Didn't fix the relationship with Miguel that was still broken. Didn't take away Carlos's anger or Sophia's fear of losing me again. Money couldn't fix any of that, but it could give us a future, a real one. We moved out of that tiny apartment, bought a house. Nothing huge, nothing fancy, but a house with a yard and enough bedrooms for everyone. I put money away for the kids' college, set up a fund so we'd never have to worry about rent or bills again. And I started a foundation, a legal defense fund for people like me, people who couldn't afford good lawyers, people who were being railroaded by the system, people who were innocent but couldn't prove it. David helped me set it up. He became the foundation's lead attorney. We've helped 12 people so far. 12 people who might have spent years, decades, in prison for crimes they didn't commit. It doesn't erase what happened to me, but it gives it meaning. Tyler got out of prison after serving 6 years, got time off for good behavior. I heard he moved to another state, changed his name, started over somewhere nobody knows what he did. Mrs. Henderson still lives in that mansion. Lost a lot of money from the lawsuit, but she's still rich, still has her life, still gets to wake up in her own bed every morning and pretend she didn't destroy someone else's life to protect her worthless son. I don't think about her much anymore. Don't let the anger consume me like it used to, because I won. Not the way I wanted to, not by getting those 7 years back, but I survived. I made it through. And I'm using what happened to me to help other people. My family is healing. Slowly. Miguel went to college. Full scholarship. Paid for by the foundation. He's studying law now. Says he wants to help people like his mom. Carlos got his GED. Started working construction. And he's doing good. Stayed out of trouble. Found a girlfriend who's good for him. Sophia is 15 now. She wants to be a writer, says she's going to tell my story one day, the real version, not the news version. Marco and I are rebuilding what we lost. It's not the same as it was before. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. But we're finding a new version of us, a stronger version maybe. Some nights I still wake up thinking I'm in that cell, still feel the panic of being trapped. Still hear the sounds of prison, the clanging metal, the shouting, the crying. But then I open my eyes, see my bedroom, feel Marco next to me, hear my kids moving around the house. And I remember, I'm free. I spent 7 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. 7 years stolen from me by a woman who chose to protect her guilty son instead of admitting the truth. 7 years away from my children, my husband, my life. But I survived. And I won. Not just in court, not just with the money. I won because I'm still here, still fighting, still making a difference. And that's worth more than all the jewelry in Mrs. Henderson's mansion. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for listening. See you soon.